One of the worst roller coasters in the world is finally being removed. That's right, Time Warp at Canada's Wonderland, one of the most universally disliked roller coasters, is going to be removed prior to the 2025 season. And today, we're going to be answering why this removal happened, what is next for this plot of land, and one very interesting question that has yet to be answered. We have a whole lot to talk about, so let's get started. So Canada's Wonderland just announced that Time Warp, their Zamperla flying coaster, will be removed prior to the 2025 season. Earlier this month, there have been a couple of rumors floating around that this flying coaster could potentially be removed sometime in the near future. But we finally have real confirmation from the park that this is actually going to be happening. And it's been a long time coming, to say the least. As I mentioned, this roller coaster is one of the most universally disliked coasters on the planet. I mean, just take a look at these restraints. There is no shot this is comfortable. As I mentioned, Time Warp was made by Zamperla and is their Volair model. This opened up back in 2004 and was added during the years that Paramount owned Canada's Wonderland. This coaster was more or less a little bit of a filler coaster for Canada's Wonderland. It appears that Paramount's main focus for Canada's Wonderland was pretty much building as many attractions as possible. And they were definitely prioritizing quantity over quality. Flight Deck, Time Warp, the Bat, their Vekoma Boomerang, like you can see a bit of a pattern here. Cheap cloned rides to get the coaster count as high as possible. And then obviously Cedar Fair came in and pretty much took the opposite approach and went quality over quantity. Behemoth, Leviathan, Yukon Striker, quality, better attractions, but at a far less quantity. And Six Flags has been slowly removing coasters that cost more to operate or are simply not as popular as they used to be. And now that this coaster is over 20 years old, it was likely starting to get a little more expensive to maintain than previously. This coaster was also not very popular, especially recently, and you combine all of those factors, and to Six Flags, this is a perfect candidate for a ride removal. So now that we explained why this coaster actually got removed, let's begin to discuss what's next for this plot of land. So obviously when you remove a coaster, you do open up a little chunk of land that could be potentially used for a future attraction. And given that Canada's Wonderland is completely landlocked and really running out of space pretty quickly, that means that a future attraction is bound to take this coaster's spot eventually. But with Canada's Wonderland's recent addition of Alpenfury, I think it's going to be a solid 3 to 5 years before you could see anything major popping up in this plot of land. And now you're probably looking at this now and thinking, that's not enough for a major roller coaster. However, right next door to Time Warp is Canada's Wonderland's also very hated Vekoma SLC Flight Deck. Flight Deck is widely considered by many to be one of the worst Vekoma SLCs out there. And when you remove both coasters, yeah, you got yourself a pretty good piece of land. That could definitely hold a major attraction sometime in the future. So what type of coaster could this plot of land hold in the near future? Well, I think Canada's Wonderland has 3 solid options. The first one, and personally probably my favorite out of these 3, would be a B&M inverted coaster. Or Vekoma invert, both would work. If Canada's Wonderland were to remove Flight Deck along with Time Warp, that would really open up a bit of a hole in their coaster lineup, because they would now be missing an inverted roller coaster, and a B&M or Vekoma invert would fill that gap very, very well. Not only that, but it would provide a high capacity, marketable crowd pleaser attraction that could easily be one of the park's most popular roller coasters. I personally really like this option. I think it makes a lot of sense in their coaster lineup, and it would be really cool if Vekoma got to build an inverted coaster here in the US. So hopefully that ends up working out. Our second pretty good option could be a Gravity Group family wooden coaster. And I must say, the more I think about this one, I really like it too. Canada's Wonderland has 3 different wooden coasters. Ghoster Coaster, which is a family kids coaster, and then you have Mighty Canadian Mindbuster and Wildebeest, which are both more old school wooden coasters. So there's no really wooden coaster to kind of bridge that gap between the kiddie coaster and the more intense Wildebeest and Mighty Canadian Mindbuster. And Canada's Wonderland definitely has a few family coasters, but they could definitely use another good one. A Gravity Group family wooden coaster would be nice and compact and deliver a fun ride experience for the whole family, and much like the inverted coaster, would likely be pretty darn popular too. And that brings us to our third potential option, which actually isn't a roller coaster at all. Because I think something that would be really cool and hopefully do pretty good for Canada's Wonderland would be to, instead of adding another roller coaster, would be to do a kind of like themed little land. For example, Adventure Port at Kings Island, or something like Aeronautica Landing at Carowinds. Like a good themed land with a couple nice flat rides, some new restaurants, and just provide a nice little area to maybe take a breather or whatever. Hopefully provide some shade and benches to rest for a little bit, ride some good flat rides, eat some good food, and just kind of chill for a little bit. I think something like that at Canada's Wonderland could do really well. And we know the new Six Flags chain really likes doing these little re-themed lands, so I think it could definitely happen too. And while it is unfortunately no new roller coaster, this isn't a terrible option either. So these are my 3 ideal additions to Canada's Wonderland, and I honestly think all 3 have a pretty solid chance of ending up at the park. But of course, we'll have to wait and see, and if you do want to stay up to date on all the latest theme park news, including this project, make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss out. Now let's finally answer my one question I have about this whole situation. And that is Canada's Wonderland actually willing to remove Flight Deck? Because all of the options we have just discussed would all pretty much require Flight Deck to be removed alongside of Time Warp. But as I said, is Canada's Wonderland going to really be willing to remove another roller coaster too? I personally think most likely. Let me explain. So we know Flight Deck is not exactly the most loved roller coaster. It's rough, it's uncomfortable, it's outdated, and it's going to start showing its age even more in the coming years. Flight Deck opened up back in 1995, meaning that this year will be its 30th year in operation. A lot of roller coasters tend to be reaching the end of their service life. We saw this with Vortex, and we could definitely see it for Flight Deck too. And I have not visited Canada's Wonderland in all fairness, but I do not believe that Flight Deck is a super popular roller coaster. Last year, Flight Deck at Canada's Wonderland only averaged a 13-minute wait according to queue times, which definitely places it in the bottom half in popularity at the park. We're getting to the point where keeping Flight Deck around doesn't really gain Canada's Wonderland a whole lot. Sure, it gets a few extra people out of the lines of more popular attractions like Leviathan, but at one point is the cost just simply too much to justify maintaining this coaster. And I think we're really getting close to hitting that mark, of where it's simply not worth continuing to maintain this coaster for years to come. So, is Canada's Wonderland actually going to be removing Flight Deck? I have to say, I really do think it could happen in the next 5 years. I'm relatively confident with that statement. And hopefully, fingers crossed, with this potential removal, we can get a really good roller coaster out of it. But as always, we're still gonna have to wait and see. Now this change is great and all, but why did Canada's Wonderland choose to build a launch coaster in Alpenfury for 2025? Well, if you want to know why launch coasters are suddenly everywhere, then check out the video on your screen right now, because it's actually really interesting. Anyway, drop a like down below if you enjoyed, subscribe for more coaster content coming your way, and as always, thank you guys for watching, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all in the next one.